Now, after your first year at Yale Law School, you got a job as a summer associate. Could you describe that?
Well, I believe that I really started what it later became called the Summer Associate Program. I had such difficulties in the first year at Yale Law School that I really wanted to go to a law firm and see, well, is this something that I really ought to get into? Because I had such trouble. And I went down to, I knew some of the partners at Davis Polk, and I went down there and I said I would like to get a job working here just to see how your firm operates. And the managing partner then, a man by the name of George Brownell, said, oh, we can't do anything. He was a graduate of Harvard Law School, by the way, and he said, well, no, we just can't do anything of that sort because we really are so afraid that our clients would be afraid that some legal opinions that had been given by the firm might be tainted because somebody who was not a lawyer, a licensed lawyer, was not involved. And I said, well, I'll take a job as a messenger. And if I could just, so I could see the inside of a law office. Well, I talked my way into Davis Polk, and I was the first summer they ever had. They called me a summer boarder. That was the name they gave me. They didn't call me a summer associate. And I sat with the messengers, and when they went off on a vacation, I would fill their place. I sat right by the door on a bench and just delivered papers. That was my summer at Davis Polk.
Now, you told me, and I think it would be worth putting on the record here, of a time when you were asked to get an order signed. And it's a fascinating story, and the aftermath of the story as well. So maybe you could put that on the record.
Well, the man who managed the office, he was not a lawyer. His name was William Bruder, but he was the manager of the entire office, and he had been with the firm at that time 50 years. And one of the stories that he loved to tell was watching people walk across the ice on the East River from downtown Manhattan to Brooklyn in the blizzard of '88. He had just started working at Davis Polk, but he witnessed people walking across the river. Well, Mr. Bruder called me in. Mr. Bruder hired all the bookkeepers. He hired all the messengers. He did all of that work. And Mr. Bruder said to me, Mr. Gillespie, and why he called me Mr. Gillespie here at his age and the age that I was, but he said, I've got something I want to have you take up to the Bronx and get signed by Judge Hammer of the state Supreme Court, who is sitting in the motion part of the Bronx County State Supreme Court. And you take it up to his chambers, and this is where he's to sign, and you won't have any problem with it, but just, well, it was a terribly hot day. God, the subway, there was no air conditioning of any sort. And I went on the subway and rode the subway up past 125th Street into the first stop in the Bronx and got out, found the Bronx County Courthouse, went up inside. It's a beautiful, the courthouse had just been opened up there at that time, I learned. And I finally got up on the third or fourth floor, and I walked down the hall, and there was a big mahogany door, and there it said, Hon, H-O-N, period, Ernest L. Hammer, Supreme Court Justice. So I rapped on the door. Nothing happened. And I waited a few moments. I rapped again. I tried the door handle. Door handle was solidly locked. So I then went to Mr. Bruder, found a public telephone. You put a nickel in those days, and called Mr. Bruder. I said, there's nobody there. He said, I sent you to have that order signed. Don't come back without it being signed. Well, it was then about 5 o'clock. And so I sat down, and I waited for about half an hour, I think, and I got up and pounded the door again. Still no sign of anything. And I really was getting very discouraged. By that time, it was going on 6 o'clock. I knew Mr. Brewer would be gone, and all he'd say to me was, "Go back again and wait till Mr. Justice Hammer comes." Well, I waited, and I was really exhausted, and it got to be 6 o'clock. I went and hammered on the door, and one more time, and this time the door flung open. And who should be standing there, but he really looked like a cherubim. He was, his skin was pink. He was wearing an undershirt, but without T-shirt. He was just an undershirt, and his arms were all pink and so forth and so on. And he couldn't have been nicer. He said, "Come in, come in. That they're all tied up." And I wondered what he was talking about. And he said, "Come on, come on, come on." And he took me over to the window in his office, and he had been sitting out on the roof overlooking the polo grounds, watching his favorite football team, I believe the Giants, but I don't know who it was. But anyway, they were still tied up when he got there, but somebody hit a home run, and he was he couldn't have been more excited and pleased. He said, "That's it, that's the game. Come in now. Now, what can I do for you, young man?" And I said, "I'd come here to get this order to show cause signed," and so forth. So, "But why do they send a young man like you? I thought they only had messengers to." I said, "Well, I'm a summer," I didn't say I'm a summer associate. I said, "I'm just a summer boarder." And they told me to. He sat down. He didn't even look at the thing. He just scribbled his name on it and so forth. And he said, "And what is your name?" I said, "Well, my name is Gillespie, Hazard Gillespie." He said, "Well, I'm very pleased to meet you. I hope I'll see you again sometime," and greeted me. And I took the order out. It was 7 o'clock by that time. Went back and climbed in the subway. And I went back to the office, and I got in, but Bruder had gone, of course, and I left the order and so on. And the next morning, Mr. Bruder said, "Well, I told you to wait. You get it signed, and you got it done, and that's fine." And this order to show cause, of course, brought on a motion, and it also had a stay in it, which was why Judge Hammer didn't look at that, I don't know, but he didn't. But in any event, he signed it. So years later, I know Henry is thinking I'm talking too long, but I'll get through this.
It's good.
It was 7 or 8 years later that I had a motion in a very complicated lawsuit that I had worked on. And Mr. Davis, John W. Davis, the head of the firm, was with me. And the night before, he said, "You like this motion so well, why don't you argue it?" And, God, the idea of a young man getting a chance with Mr. Davis around, the clients all expected Mr. Davis to argue. I was thrilled. So, lo and behold, we went to court, and Mr. Davis here where Mr. King is, and the door opened behind the bench, and who should come walking in but Judge Ernest E.L. Hammer. And he was all in his robes, and his face was still quite pink, but he was fully dressed and so forth. And he came on the bench, and when he came on the bench, he bowed. "Mr. Gillespie, it's nice to see you again." I couldn't have been more thrilled. And I know Mr. Davis wondered where it could have been that I'd ever seen Hammer, Judge Hammer, before, and I, of course, told him afterward. But in any event, I like this story because I tell it to young lawyers and said, no matter how lowly a job you're given, go ahead and do it, and it'll turn out it may be of help to you, and so forth. Now, I think that's what you wanted.
Yes,
I hope I didn't
exactly
talk too
right.
long.
Exactly right. But since you mentioned Mr. Davis's name, Mr. Gillespie just suggested that he could add something to what he's just said.
Well, I'm very pleased to say that Judge Hammer decided the motion in my favor, and it went to the appellate division, and they unanimously affirmed. The other side then applied to the Court of Appeals, and the New York Court of Appeals affirmed Judge Hammer. So it was a complete success story. That's all.
You mentioned Mr. Davis, and I think this may be a good time to have you describe who he was and a brief word about his background, because you worked so closely with him over the years.
Well, I was extremely fortunate. When I came to Davis Polk and sought a job on a permanent basis when I finished law school, I was just there were 3 or 4 other lawyers. One of them became quite famous because his name was Aaron Root. And Aaron Root is the man who discovered Wendell Willkie and created the Willkie clubs and persuaded Wendell Willkie to run against Roosevelt. And in any event, it was a group of 3 or 4 lawyers, and I was just in a pool and doing general work, and all of a sudden I got a call one day. I think I'd been there. It was the summer of '36 that I started. I believe it was the summer of '37 that Mr. Davis wanted to see me, and Mr. Davis called me in, and he sort of pointed his finger, "Sit down," and he told me that he was involved in a case in the Supreme Court of the United States, and that all his helpers had resigned to go either in the Army. At that time, war was, of course, a great threat. It was 1937. But in any event, he said, "I'd like you to take these briefs, and I've been asked," Mr. Davis said, "to re-argue this case in the Supreme Court of the United States. It was argued this past year, and at that point, President Roosevelt's court-packing plan had fallen apart, and he had appointed Hugo Black to fill the vacancy on the Supreme Court, and the court granted re-argument of this Bonneville Dam case, it was called, and Mr. Davis was then called upon by the contractors who were involved in the case to present the argument, the re-argument, when the time came. So I got this chance to write Mr. Davis's brief.